Welcome back, everyone, to a special holiday edition of the Hidden History Happy Hour. We're keeping it festive over here. On to football. Alex, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Great to be back. World Cup in full flow now. We're going to tell a football story in a little while.
Yes, can't wait. And I was going to start out the show by saying, hey, it's a season of upsets, and we don't mean the U.S. elections.
Oof, boy, oh boy. Germany performing very, very badly. Argentina performing very, very badly. By the time this podcast drops, we'll know the result of the England-America game. Thank goodness we don't know it yet, because it would then have just this podcast would have fallen apart into a series of abusive remarks either way. But it's looking. You got to say cautiously, it's looking pretty good for England.
I don't know. I think Coach Lasso is going to pull us out.
We'll see. I make no predictions about England, the USA, but I would say, Italy's not even there. Germany chronically underperforming. Argentina really struggling. Same as Brazil. So all of a sudden, the countries that you thought were going to dominate are touching wood as everywhere. But it's looking all right for England.
Iran and Saudi Arabia with wins.
I know, amazing, absolutely, amazing. Japan beat Germany.
I'm sure there's an Axis joke in there somewhere, but I can't.
Not a safe one.
I can't pull it fast enough. So listen, as everyone knows, you've been gone for a while across the seas. Tell us about the nuptials. Tell us about the honeymoon. And by the way, cheers. Congratulations.
Cheers. Thank you very much. And for the first time in the recording of our podcast, I'm on the softs. I can't drink anymore after 2 weeks of honeymoon. We had a wonderful wedding. It was missing one American, but other than that, that's all right. Other than that, it was great. We were married in St. Bartholomew the Great, which is just by St. Bart's Hospital, great historic site. If our listeners know that, and in fact, people will know it because when Duckface punches out Hugh Grant at the end of Four Weddings and a Funeral, that's the church. It's in that church. It's a magnificent, beautiful church. Really tremendous choir, a perfect setting. And then we had a reception at the Garden Museum, which is a very attractive venue here in London. And we went for our honeymoon in the Seychelles for 2 weeks, which is just perfect. So I'm a very lucky and a very happy man.
And you were quite unplugged. There was no, even your social media was pretty quiet.
I know. Don't worry, it won't happen again. It's just a complete one-off. But it was lovely to do that. And I want to say a big thanks to Mike Cole for stepping in and filling my seat for a couple of weeks.
Cheers.
Couldn't have thought of a better guy to step in. Great historical knowledge, and I thought you guys did some super episodes. So
thank you. Yeah, we had a great time. Just by coincidence, he knew the author of that horror novel that I recommended in the book club.
Town.
No, yeah. He knew the book very well. He had publicly reviewed it about 6 or 7 years ago, and he knows
no kidding.
Paul Tremblay, the author. Yeah, and for those who didn't catch one of those episodes, get that book next year at Halloween, Head Full of Ghosts. It's amazing. Speaking as you were of Hugh Grant, Alex, as we record this, it's the day after Thanksgiving in the US of A. And as you can see, one of the Cunningham traditions is we ban all things Christmas until Thanksgiving. And then the morning after, we go after it. So I've had Christmas carols playing for 2 hours. We've got the tree up. Have to ask you, Love Actually, love it or hate it?
Terrible film.
Terrible.
Sends terrible film. Sends all the world bad messages about everything. Almost all the plot lines are just deeply depressing and awful. I think it's dreadful. The true Christmas film is, of course, Die Hard.
Of course,
yes. That is the best Christmas movie, and it's the movie that I shall watch at Christmas, of course.
I agree. It is a Christmas movie. I'm down on that side of the question. I wouldn't say it's the best Christmas movie. I prefer a few over that. Elf is one. Also,
Here Speaks a Man with Children.
No, that's true. That's true. Well, what about It's a Wonderful Life?
That's my mother's favorite film, and therefore I have, at least until I went to university and so forth, I watched it every single year with my mum. Your savings are low. I like that film very, very much, and it's a wonderful ending. And people rally around, and I think it's a super film. But no, Die Hard's even better.
And I don't know how many know this story, but Jimmy Stewart, very late in his life, said that the filming of that movie, which was right after World War II, saved his life. because he was, as you probably know, a much decorated bomber pilot in the war.
Yes.
But heavily traumatized. Today, we would say PTSD, and he'd be able to get help. But in those days, it was, shell shock, and no one talked about it. And he said late in life he was on the verge of suicide.
Good grief.
And it was working with Frank Capra on that film.
And the plot of that film, which is about what happens if you were to will yourself away.
Yeah.
Gosh. Right, we should tell a story.
Do it. Football.
World Cup here. So here's the football story from my new book, More Lessons from History. And
so I will be receiving next week. Thanks, Amazon.
It's about a guy, Chris Nicholl, who played for Aston Villa. It's in the 1970s. Aston Villa, by the way, is in Birmingham, where my now wife is from.
Yeah.
And he was a defender, and his name therefore didn't appear on the score sheet all that often. And so my story is the day he scored 4 times, and he was the only scorer that day in a game that ended in a draw. We'll work that out. I'll explain. Villa playing Leicester, 20th of March, 1976. Chris Nicholl scores an own goal. He concedes. He scores an own goal to put Leicester in front. And then, remarkable, he restores the balance with an equaliser up the other end just before the whistle blows for half-time. And you can imagine the ribbing you get from your teammates at half-time when you've scored both goals in the half in the dressing room. And little did they know. Shortly after play is resumed, Leicester is on the attack. Nicholl finds himself in the unenviable position of scoring what he, quite rather charmingly, disarmingly, refers to as a perler of an own goal, striker's goal, diving header. He said no goalie in the world would have saved that. It's a perfect goal, just unfortunately at the wrong end of the pitch. So that's his 3rd goal, and of course only Leicester's 2nd, putting the opposition in front. And fortunately for him, no doubt by this point, the assembled spectators of the ground are waiting with bated breath to see what this guy does next. Chris Nicholl's 4th goal that day goes in the net at the right end of the pitch, resulting in a draw. 2 goals for each team, only name on the score sheet. And one rather wonders what Villa fans and his teammates made of things that day. And there's an amusing postscript to it. So he's the only man who I've scoured the annals of football history. He's the only man known to have scored 4 goals in a 2-2 draw. And Nicholl naturally wanted to keep the match ball. And he asked the referee, and the ref said, "No, it's my last game. I want it for myself." And Nicholl said, "Yeah, just my luck. My first hat trick in a Villa shirt, and I don't even get to keep the ball." So lesson from this story, consider the way that he's discussed the game afterwards. This is his claim to fame, right? It's how he's become immortalized in football history. In the face of criticism and adversity, if it really is all down to you, you should own it with frankness and directness and lightheartedness, because it's both charming and disarming. But also do try to stop scoring own goals.
And so what became of him?
No, he's just he was a. I don't think it's too harsh to say he was a well-performing journeyman footballer, retired from football. He played out his innings, but it's never been it's never a feat that's never been matched since. There's an interesting. I compare and contrast it with Dennis Law, who was one of the pantheon of great players, and was in the FA Cup 4th round tie in the UK. And he scored 6 times for his side, Manchester City. It was Man City, Luton, and he scored 6 times before playing conditions, which were absolutely appalling, meant that the match was abandoned 6-2. Interesting, but ironically, but coincidentally, the score that England just won by in the World Cup. So it was 6-2, and he'd put 5. He'd scored all 6, and the match was abandoned. And then he'd never scored 6 goals in a game before, and he never did again. And it was in a cancelled game. The fixture was replayed, ironically, on a pitch that was, if anything, even worse. And this time the authorities said, "Get on with it. It's a replay. We're not going to come back and do this again." And Dennis Law scored again, but they still lost 3-1. So he scored 7 goals across 2 games and still lost.
Well, the first story reminds me a little bit about of one of my favorite sports movies called Tin Cup, which I don't know if you've seen this. Kevin
Costner,
movie,
right? It's Kevin Costner.
And Rene Russo and Cheech from Cheech and Chong. And it supports my theorem that Kevin Costner has never made a bad sports movie or a good almost any other movie.
The Untouchables is the exception to that.
Almost any other.
The Untouchables is wonderful.
Yeah,
he also, he made a good Western.
Well, so yeah, Dances with Wolves, one in a cast. Oh, no, you're talking about Silverado. Yeah, with Danny Glover and a cast of thousands. Yeah,
that's a good film. But I The Untouchables is great. But I like your theory about him making good sports movies. That's Tin Cup is the movie where he has this stupid bet with the club bore who hits the ball down the road, right? Am I remembering? Yeah, he says, I can drive further than you.
Yeah, and Don Johnson from Miami Vice.
Right.
Yeah. But the relevant part of it is he's dating his psychiatrist, Rene Russo, and he gets, against all odds, he makes it to the PGA Championship or the Masters or whatever. I think it's the Masters. And he his entire career, he's been undone by his own perfectionism. And so he's hits this water shot. He's guaranteed to be in the tournament next year. He's back in his career. He hits this water shot, goes in the water. Instead of taking a drop, hits it again, goes in again, and agonizing 6 minutes of film time later, he is put 11 balls into the water, or 10 maybe, and he's now disqualified himself from the future tournament. And he finally hits the ball on the green and scores a 12, which is just, unheard of in professional golf. Even I don't score 12s. And Rene Russo, cheering him up, says, listen, 100 years from now, no one's going to remember anyone at this tournament, but they're going to remember your 12.
Right. Well, one of these days we'll do my golf story, which you may recall. In fact,
that story.
The credits, of course, to my book. It's getting made into a movie.
Love it.
There's nothing to do with my book, but it's getting made into a movie. But we wanted to tell a different story today. You wanted me to tell a different story.
So we're going to take the mood in a very different direction now, and I want to honor the direction or honor the story by opening a bottle of Ladeg Scotch whiskey that my fiance Lisa, a little development since our last show, my fiance got me, and I'm going to pour just a little bit. I'm not a big Scotch drinker, but in honor of the men that you're going to talk about, I will have this at the ready.
That's a suitable one. And indeed, I got this story from my now wife's uncle. So my wife's father's brother told me the story. New Year's Day, 1919. His Majesty's yacht Iolare, which is Scots Gaelic for eagle, was transporting the men of the Isle of Lewis home after the First World War. Heavily overloaded with soldiers and sailors who were keen to get home, she set out from the port at Kyle of Loch Alch on the British mainland's northwest coast. And the conditions were terrible and they were sailing at night. And a mile from the harbour at Stornoway, the main settlement on Lewis, much closer to the shore than that, for reasons that are still disputed. Was it bad navigation? Was it negligence? The ship struck the rocks known as the Beasts of Holm and swiftly sank. Over 200 men drowned. The records were quite poorly kept in these heady days of relief after the war. And with so many people, so many men overwhelmingly keen to return to normal life, who had seized upon whatever route had become available to them, and those responsible for transport were naturally sympathetic to the servicemen in front of them and turning a blind eye and thinking they were doing somebody a favor. Some people lacked the proper papers, so we'll never know for absolutely sure how many souls were lost. But the island lost at least 181 of her native sons, and perhaps more. But the official number of Lewis casualties were 181. And as I say, more than 200 overall. It's effectively, for an island like that, it's half a generation wiped out at a stroke. And they died well after the armistice that ended the war in which they had fought. I find it unbearable to think about that night. The men were in uniforms, heavy boots included. Many of them couldn't swim. The lights of Stornoway, the lights of home, would have been plainly visible to those who drowned, so close to the end of their journey after all that they'd endured. And their families were, of course, there waiting for them in knots of happy, expectant people in the harbour. And instead of the reunion that they had expected, the women of Lewis found the bodies of their menfolk washed ashore the next day. And the devastation wrought upon Lewis is unimaginable, and the tragic sinking of the Iolare is the worst loss of life in British waters in peacetime. There is a hero to the story too, a man called John MacLeod, who was a Lewis man, swam through those treacherous waters from the ship as she went under, carrying a line ashore, which was grasped desperately by those waiting for the ship. And some 40 men made their way to safety on that lifeline from the wreck, who would otherwise most likely have been added to the death toll. Two postscripts. The first is that those who survived suffered terribly on their depleted island. Facing the families of those who died was inevitably exceptionally hard in this tiny community. And whilst island life might not have offered all that young people wished for after the war, I think it's impossible to think that the depression into which this event plunged the people of Lewis, was not responsible in large part for the departure of some 300 further of her sons for Canada in 1923. So Lewis suffered doubly for this post-war tragedy, and the depletion of her population was savage. In 2019, the Duke of Rothesay, then also known as Prince Charles, now known as King Charles, attended a ceremony to mark the centenary of the disaster and unveiled a memorial to the dead on the island. And it includes a depiction of MacLeod's lifeline. The wreck of the ship is there by the rocks to this day, plainly visible from the Lewis shore, another grim memorial to the destruction of the men born of the island by which she sank. That is my saddest story.
Salute to them.
Salute to them.
And to their families. And this really brings home the horror of war, not just on the folks fighting it, but on the folks back home. And I'm sure, I don't know if it's recorded or not, but I'd be shocked if there weren't a number of suicides over the ensuing decades in that town, and probably some by men who survived. Yeah, it's a wretched one, isn't it? The lights of home being visible as you flounder in the water. It's just it's the hardest story to write and to tell. And to my shame, I've not yet been to those islands, but I would like to go very much. Anyway, and now as would I.
Yeah, good. Well, perhaps we'll go together. Anyway, good to be back. Great to be telling stories again. The books are both selling well, and I look forward to doing more episodes. If people have suggestions to which stories they want us to tell, they should get in touch. I want to say thanks again to Mike Cole. Brian, thanks for your patience. Great to be back.
Great to be back. Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and enjoy the show. And please, as Alex says, participate. Message us, give us suggestions for stories. I'm sure more lessons from history is already underway. So perhaps
lessons from history 3, I think we might call that. Call the last one.
Just simply trip.
Yep.
All right, everybody.
All right.
Happy holidays to you. We'll see you soon. Cheers.
Cheers.